spring of 2022, and I was 19, just finished with my second year of college. My roommate Taylor invited me to his hometown, Maple Hollow, a small rural town in West Virginia. I had never heard of it, but when he showed me pictures of his family's land, green hills, dense woods, and a peaceful lake, I was intrigued. It seemed like a perfect getaway from the chaos of school. We arrived on a Wednesday. Taylor's parents were welcoming. Their farmhouse was old and charming in that rustic way. The scent of fresh-cut grass and blooming flowers filled the air, and everything felt perfect. Too perfect. On our second day, Taylor took me on a hike into the woods behind his house. He mentioned there was an old, hidden watchtower we could find if we followed a trail. But when we ventured deep into the forest, something strange hit me. It wasn't the normal forest sounds I was used to. No birds, no insects, no rustling of the trees. Just silence. Then we stumbled upon a small stone circle deep in the woods. The stones were covered in moss, and strange, intricate symbols were carved into them. Taylor immediately tensed up. "We should leave," he said, his voice low. I laughed it off, but he wasn't joking. I could feel it too, a strange weight in the air around the stones, like something ancient and heavy. We left quickly, but that night I had a nightmare. I dreamt of walking through a dark, dead forest, and there were whispers all around me. I couldn't see anyone, but I felt eyes on me. I woke up drenched in sweat, the feeling of being watched lingering. The next few days passed uneventfully, but things started to feel off. At night, I kept hearing faint whispers from outside the house, too faint to make out, but there. Sometimes, I'd wake up to find the window in my room open, even though I was sure I had closed it. One night, I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of a woman's scream. It was long, drawn out, like it was coming from far away, but it wasn't a scream of fear. It felt like a warning. We brushed it off as nothing, but the strange occurrences didn't stop. Then came the muddy footprints on the porch the following morning. Bare feet, but they didn't look human. The toes were elongated, unnaturally so. Taylor started looking more worried. But the worst part came that night. At 2 a.m., we heard it again, the scream. Closer this time, almost as if it was outside the window. This time, we didn't ignore it. We bolted downstairs to ask Taylor's dad if he'd heard anything. He looked up from his paper and just said, "Stay out of the woods after dark. They wake up in the spring." That was the first time I heard him mention they. The next night, I woke up to something worse. My window was open, and on the windowsill was a dead bird. Its eyes were missing, its wings twisted unnaturally. I slammed the window shut and locked it, but the whispers didn't stop. The next morning, Taylor was visibly shaken. He'd seen something outside his door the previous night. It wasn't human. It was tall, thin, with eyes that glowed faintly. We were both terrified, but we couldn't leave, not yet. On the third day, we decided to go back to the stone circle during daylight. But this time it was different. There were new flowers growing around it, flowers I had never seen before. Vines seemed to be crawling toward the center of the stones. And there, sitting on one of the stones, was a deer skull, its antlers twisted unnaturally. As we stood there, I felt the air grow colder, heavier. Then I heard it, a whisper. But this time, it wasn't just the wind. I turned around, expecting to see someone behind me. But there was nothing, just the trees and that thick silence again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I woke up at 3:15 a.m. to the sound of a window opening. This time, it wasn't my window. It was the window in my room. I rushed to it, and sure enough, it was wide open, and sitting on the sill was the same dead bird. This time, it was covered in dirt, like it had been buried and unearthed. I quickly shut the window again, but the whispers, they kept coming, louder and clearer. I heard my name. Eli. It was coming from under the bed. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I didn't know what was real anymore. I ran out of my room and found Taylor. His face was pale, and he wasn't looking at me. He was staring out the window, eyes wide with fear. "I saw it," he whispered, barely audible. "It's in the woods. It's watching us." The rest of the night was a blur. We stayed up until sunrise, too scared to sleep. And as the light came, we packed up our things, left the house, and never looked back. But as we drove away from Maple Hollow, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was with us, watching us. It followed us for miles, the whispers still faintly ringing in my ears, calling my name, just like in a dream. We never spoke about it again. But every spring, when the flowers bloom and the air starts to warm, I feel that pull again. The whispers return. And I know it's waiting for me in the woods, behind the stones, watching. And if you ever hear it, if you ever hear your name whispered from the dark, don't go looking for it. It was the beginning of May when I visited my cousin's place in a small town called Forest Pines. I'd never been there before, but when she invited me for the weekend, I figured it would be a nice break from city life. The town was isolated, surrounded by miles of dense forest, but the beauty of it all was undeniable. You could barely see the houses from the main road, as thick trees lined every path. When I arrived at my cousin Claire's house, everything seemed perfect. Her house was old, but cozy, perched near the edge of the woods. There was a large front porch that overlooked the forest, and the sound of birds singing filled the air. As we sat and chatted, Claire mentioned something about the town's history, how it used to be a logging town back in the early 1900s, but something happened in the woods that caused the town to decline. People started disappearing. Some say it was the spirits of the forest. Others say it was something darker. I didn't think much of it. Who believes in ghost stories, right? That night, after dinner, Claire and I decided to go for a walk in the woods. She told me there was a clearing deep in the forest that was perfect for stargazing. We walked for what seemed like hours, the woods growing thicker, the sounds of wildlife fading into a heavy silence. The trees were so tall and close together that the moonlight barely filtered through. When we reached the clearing, it was beautiful. The stars were clearer than I'd ever seen them, and for a while we just sat in silence, gazing at the sky. But then I noticed something strange. There was a shadow moving in the trees, way off in the distance. At first, I thought it was just an animal, but then it moved in a way that didn't seem natural. It was walking upright, almost like a person, but it was too far away to make out any details. Claire noticed it too. "Let's go back," she said, her voice suddenly shaky. I didn't argue. We started walking back toward the house, but something didn't feel right. I felt eyes on me, like something was watching. The silence in the woods was overwhelming. The usual sounds of insects and birds completely gone. We barely made it halfway back when we heard it. A low, guttural growl, followed by the sound of footsteps behind us. I turned around, but there was nothing there. We started walking faster, but the growls kept following us, getting closer, until it sounded like something was right behind us. I told Claire to run, and we bolted through the trees, not daring to look back. We reached the house breathless, and when we went inside, Claire locked every door and window. We sat in the living room in silence, both of us shaken by what had happened. "That thing," Claire said, her voice trembling, "is what people in this town talk about. They say it's the spirit of someone who died in the woods. Some people think it's still out there, hunting." I laughed it off at first, but then I started hearing things. The sound of someone walking outside the house. But no one was there. I checked the windows, but I saw nothing, just the blackness of the woods. The next morning, I woke up early, still on edge from the night before. Claire was still asleep, so I decided to take a quick walk outside. The sun was rising, and the woods looked peaceful in the light of day. But as I walked closer to the edge of the forest, I noticed something strange. There were fresh, deep footprints in the dirt, leading straight into the woods. They were large and animal-like, but human enough to give me chills. And they didn't stop at the tree line. They continued deep into the forest, where the shadows were thick. I didn't go in. Instead, I went back inside and tried to forget about it. But the eerie feeling stayed with me. That afternoon, Claire and I decided to leave the house and drive into town. As we passed the edge of the woods, I saw something that made my heart stop. There, standing just inside the tree line, was a figure. It was tall, thin, and dressed in old, tattered clothes. Its face was hidden in the shadows, but I could feel its eyes on me. I screamed at Claire to stop the car, but when we looked back, the figure was gone. Not even a trace of it remained. We couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. We had to leave. That night, as we packed our things, we heard the growl again. This time, it was loud and close, almost as if it was right outside the door. Claire grabbed my arm, her face pale with fear. "We need to go. Now," she whispered. We left immediately, never looking back. I don't know what it was that we encountered in those woods, but I'll never forget the feeling of being watched. Even now, when I go camping, I can't help but feel the chill of those woods following me. I know something is still out there, hiding in the trees, waiting for anyone foolish enough to step into its territory. If you ever find yourself in forest pines, don't wander too deep into the woods, because whatever it is that's out there, it's not something you want to meet. It was supposed to be the perfect spring break getaway. My friends and I had rented a cabin by Lake Echo, a secluded spot deep in the woods of northern Michigan. We'd heard about the place from some old camping brochures, and the idea of spending a week away from the hustle and bustle of city life sounded amazing. The cabin was charming, rustic but clean, nestled at the edge of the lake. The sun was shining, the air was crisp, and the water sparkled like diamonds. It was peaceful, too peaceful, I thought, but we quickly settled in, unpacked, and started our weekend plans. The first day was spent hiking, swimming, and enjoying the beauty of the lake. The silence at the cabin at night was something I couldn't quite get used to. No cars, no people, just the sound of the wind and the occasional hoot of an owl. I wasn't complaining. It was the perfect escape. But I started feeling like something was missing, like there was something off about the place. By the second night, things started to get strange. Around 11 p.m., when we were all sitting around the fire, one of my friends, Laura, mentioned she had heard a scream earlier that evening. At first, we thought she was joking. A scream? Like a fox or something. I asked. "No," she replied, shaking her head. It was a woman, a long, drawn-out scream. It came from the lake. We laughed it off, figuring it was some kind of animal or maybe even someone else on the lake. But as the night went on, the feeling of unease grew. We went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. Every few minutes, I would hear something, faint, but definitely there, a faint whisper of a scream in the distance. It sounded like it was coming from the water. I pulled the covers over my head, hoping I was just imagining it. But then it happened again, a piercing scream, echoing across the lake. My heart raced. I wasn't sure if I should go check it out or just ignore it. I decided to wake my friends. But by the time I got to their rooms, the sound had stopped. The next day, everything seemed fine. We went boating and had a good time, but I couldn't shake the image of that scream in my mind. When I brought it up to my friends, they shrugged it off, saying I was probably just hearing things, or it was some kind of weird echo from a forest. But that night, things escalated. We were outside on the deck when we all heard it at the same time. That same scream, louder this time, unmistakable. It was a woman's scream, filled with fear and desperation. It sounded like it was coming from the middle of the lake. We froze, staring at each other, too scared to move. After a long silence, we all grabbed flashlights and headed down to the dock, trying to figure out what was going on. The lake was pitch black, and we couldn't see anything beyond the faint outline of the water. But as we stood there, a faint ripple disturbed the surface, and we heard it again, the scream. This time it was even closer. Without thinking, I jumped in the boat with Laura, and we paddled toward the center of the lake, against the growing fear inside me. As we got closer, the scream came again, only this time it was a desperate, chilling cry. We shined the flashlight across the water, trying to find the source. There, barely visible in the beam of light, was something that made my blood run cold. A figure, standing in the water, waist deep, with long, flowing hair. Her back was to us, and her arms were raised above her head, like she was reaching for something. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Are you okay?" There was no response, just that eerie stillness. We tried to row closer, but the boat wouldn't budge. It was as if something was holding it back. Then, in the distance, I saw something that made my heart stop. A dark shape moving toward us, fast. It was as if something was swimming beneath the water, circling the boat. That's when the woman turned. I will never forget her face. Her eyes were black as midnight, and her mouth was stretched wide in a scream that wasn't human. It was a scream we'd been hearing all along. I don't remember how we got back to the shore. I just remember panic setting in. We ran back to the cabin, and I looked back only once. The figure was standing by the water, her face now just a dark silhouette against a moonlit lake. The next morning, we packed up and left the cabin early. We didn't speak much on the drive back, but none of us ever forgot what we saw that night. Years later, I looked up the history of Lake Echo, and what I found still haunts me. In the late 1800s, there was a tragedy on the lake. A woman named Evelyn, who drowned after a boat capsized in a storm. They say her body was never found, and some believe her spirit still haunts the lake, crying out for help to anyone who dares venture too close. I don't know what we saw that night, but I do know this. If you ever find yourself at Lake Echo, don't go out on the water after dark. Whatever it is that screams from the lake, it's not looking for help. It's looking for you. I never believed in anything paranormal. At least, that's what I used to think. Until that spring weekend, when I went camping in the woods near the small town of Willow Creek. My friends and I were looking for something adventurous to do, and a secluded camping trip seemed like the perfect getaway. The first day was beautiful. The sun was shining, and the breeze was cool, but not too chilly. The trees were just starting to bloom, and the air had that fresh, earthy scent of spring. We set up camp near an old grove of trees that seemed to stretch endlessly into the distance. We joked about how spooky it looked, with the twisted branches and dense underbrush. But it was all fun and games at first. As the sun began to set, the forest started to change. It wasn't the usual peaceful evening that we were used to. The wind picked up, but instead of the usual rustling of leaves, the sound fell off, like the trees themselves were whispering. It wasn't the wind, I could tell. There was something else in those whispers, voices, faint and distant, like someone was calling out from deep within the grove. At first, I shrugged it off as nothing more than my imagination playing tricks on me. But as night fell, the whispers grew louder. I could hear my friends moving around the campfire, but the whispers seemed to be all around us. I mentioned it to one of my friends, Mark, who also heard it but didn't say anything. He just looked at me with a worried expression, like he knew something was wrong but didn't want to admit it. By midnight, we were all on edge. The whispers weren't just random noises anymore. They were clear, distinct voices, voices that seemed to be calling our names. I thought it was a prank at first, but when I turned to look at my friends, I saw they were just as scared as I was. Then one of the voices stopped. I'll never forget what it said. It was my name, clear as day. John, it whispered. I froze. I didn't move. I didn't want to move. The voice sounded so close, but I knew no one was around us. I turned to Mark, who had heard it too. His face was pale, and he whispered, "We need to leave now." We tried to pack up and leave, but the whispers followed us. No matter where we went in that grove, the voices would not stop. The air grew colder, and the trees seemed to close in on us. The moon was hidden behind clouds, and the only light was from our flashlights, which flickered as if something was draining the battery. We finally made it back to the edge of the grove, but the whispers didn't stop. They followed us, just beyond the tree line, always just out of sight. As we hurried back to the car, I could hear the voice again, this time louder. It was no longer just calling my name. It was speaking in full sentences. "Don't leave," the voice said. "Stay with us." We were terrified. We didn't say a word to each other as we piled into the car and drove away, but I could feel the weight of whatever was in those woods watching us. The whispers still echoed in my mind, growing fainter as we drove further from the grove, but I could still hear them, faintly calling from the trees. The next morning, we went back to the area in the daylight, hoping that everything would seem normal. But when we reached the grove, something was off. The trees, which had been full of life the day before, now appeared dead. The leaves were brown, even though it was spring, and there was a thick fog that clung to the ground. We found the spot where we had been the night before, and the ground was disturbed, as though someone had been digging around it. It wasn't just the eerie appearance of the place that unsettled us. It was a feeling of being watched, like something was still there, waiting. We left Willow Creek that day, but I still can't shake the feeling that something followed us. Every time I go into the woods, I hear the whispers in the back of my mind, and to this day, I won't go near that grove. The whispers still haunt me. I don't know who or what was calling out to us, but I've learned that some places are best left undisturbed. If you ever visit Willow Creek, stay away from the grove. You'll hear the whispers too, and once you do, you'll never forget them.